Well, let me move on then to Father Ron Walters, who is building Paul Egret's service station in Card. And again, Father Ron could not be here tonight, but he has sent us a video of part 2 of his build in Card of this model. So let's see the video, please, Alan.
In this second part, I will show how I braced the walls, and I will show how I gave a primer coat to the walls both inside and out. Then I will show how I colored the walls to prepare them for signage, and finally I will show how I scratch built the windows and doors. I mentioned in part 1 of this presentation that one thing you would need is 1/8 inch square strip wood. But if you have standard matches, not book matches, but the standard stick matches that come in a box with either strike on the box or otherwise, you can cut off the flammable head and use these as ways to brace the walls. Here is a photo of the bracing of the walls. Cardboard is stiff, but it is flimsy too. If bent too far, it will crease, and correcting a crease can be frustrating. Note that some walls do not have bracing at the edge of the walls. The purpose of the bracing is first and foremost to strengthen the walls. However, there is a secondary reason for bracing, and that is to have some way to glue two walls together. Since I used a square to lay out the cardboard subwalls, the edges should be square. Lay a piece of 1/8 inch basswood strip along a wall that should have the bracing set back, and draw a line down the inside edge of the stripwood. When you glue the brace in place, set the brace on top of the line you drew. This allows for the fact that the line you drew is actually outside of the stripwood that you use to brace the back of this wall. When you glue the walls together, you can put the glue on the edges where the stripwood meets. Keep this in mind for the roof of the fueling area and how it will be glued to the outer front half wall and the extension on the side walls. If you use stripwood to give a gluing edge to the bottom of the structure, you will also need to think about what doors and windows you will be using. If you are using either Tichy doors and windows or Grantline doors and windows on your model, you can brace across the door openings at the bottom of your walls. Both of those companies sell two kinds of doors and windows, one set for masonry structures and the other for wood structures. The former does not have trim on the outside of the opening. The latter does. If you use castings from either source, you will not need to put trim around the doors and windows for those wood structure castings. Using those castings also means that you will need to cut openings for the doors and windows based on the measurements of those castings. I chose to scratch build my doors and windows from layers of index cards and cardstock. Normally, side walls without gables are glued between the gabled ends. Look at the picture in the upper left. This is the ice house build that Chris Blackmar was conducting on the weekend workshop of New Tracks modeling. This allows roofing to come down over the side walls without creating a gap between the side wall and the roof. You can see in that photo that the short side of the roof will easily fit over the side wall. The design of this service station structure, however, does not permit that. Look at the photo in the upper right. The upper part of the side walls is an extension of the side wall. The gabled ends will have to be fitted between the side walls. You can see that there is a slight gap created by the gabled end meeting the side wall. We will deal with this later when we glue the walls together. Gluing a brace to a brace is stronger than gluing the cardboard to the brace. But more importantly, gluing a brace to a brace will also help square up the building. That is why some bracing at the sides of the walls are at the edge and some are set back from the side walls. As you lay out your bracing, think about how the walls will be glued together. You probably noticed in the last photo that there are gaps in the side walls of my build. The front wall in the upper left corner of this photo will be glued into the areas indicated by the arrows in the photo. This is the main reason why I waited until now to add bracing to my walls. When I cut out the walls from the cereal box, I did not know exactly how the walls would go together. So rather than put bracing on the walls at that time, I waited until later to put bracing on the walls. If you look closely, you will see places on the back of the wall where the printing is missing. I had bracing glued there before I began to dry fit the walls together. It is important in construction to dry fit things before gluing things together. Initially, I did not do that. I presumed that I could put bracing where I thought it should go. You can see that there is considerable space where the front wall will be eventually glued between the side walls. After removing the bracing I glued in, I cut pieces of it to use as gluing spots for the front wall under the side windows. Look at where those red circles are. The bracing on the back of the front wall will be glued to those small vertical pieces and the ends of the bracing at the top of the side walls. Finally, before I prime these pieces, you can also see that the area behind the windows and doors are unobstructed by bracing. Often when I work with cardboard and paper, I brace the heck out of walls. Cardboard, cardstock, and paper have no grain to them as wood or embossed styrene do. You may ask why I did not brace around the doors and windows. It might seem that these areas may be subject to warping, and that is a good observation. There are several reasons why I did not brace in those two areas. Is it possible to overbrace or to have too much bracing? Or perhaps a better way to put it, when is enough enough? To answer that question, you need to ask yourself how much you may be handling the finished structure. If you're going to mount it permanently to your layout, then you don't need to brace the heck out of something. Another question to ask yourself is how humid is your layout area? If you are dealing with high humidity that you cannot control, you may need to overbrace so that your walls will not warp. An alternative is to build with styrene, which is less likely to react to humidity. I'm going to use enamel spray paint to prime this model. The primer seals the cardboard, cardstock, and index card, which is the next step. This gives some stability to the porous material, even against humidity. It's not perfect, but better than material that is not sealed with a primer. Finally, I live in the high desert Southwest, where our humidity rarely gets above 30% and most often is in the range of 10 to 15%. Here is a photo of the walls that have been primed. I used a black enamel flat primer on the inside of all the walls because I do not intend to detail the inside of the structure. I used a gray primer on the outside of the walls. This will give an even coat as a base coat for all the colors that will be used on this model. I colored the outside of the walls using a sponge technique that has been described by many YouTube modeling creators. I sponged on vintage white more heavily at the top of the walls and less so at the bottom to make it look like some of the paint lower down on the walls was beginning to flake off. Later, I will use a wash of India ink and isopropyl alcohol to emphasize the fact that grooved siding is not recent. I will also dry brush some light gray paint to highlight the high spots. The trim color I used is raw sienna. It does not exactly match the color in Paul's drawings, but it does add something to the structure. Paul's drawing shows a darker color on the front doors of the building, so I used burnt umber. The picture shows all the windows and doors. I will describe how I make those in the following slides. Paul's drawings has very fine mullions in the windows. To create the windows for the front of the building and the two sides of the building, I used the free software program Inkscape. I used a technique that David Rayrig described in his build and is detailed by the author of the YouTube channel Chandwell. I imported a copy of Paul's front wall and a portion of one of the side walls into Inkscape. I started a second layer and began creating boxes on top of the black areas where the windows were on Paul's drawing. They are in red in the screen capture in the slide above. I also imported the garage door. Later on, I decided I did not need the garage door windows or the windows behind the front door because I could mount clear window material behind those areas later. What was most important was capturing the exact position of the mullions on the windows on the front and side walls. After capturing what you see in the slide above, I deleted the layer which contained Paul's front wall and side walls. I then printed the document on my printer using the cheapest full sheet labels I could find on the internet. The Chandwell YouTube channel recommends the cheapest because such labels use the cheapest glue, which makes removing the little red squares easier later on. I cut off the top of the sheet with the window arrangements and saved the rest to use for another project. I pulled off the backing material and applied it to a clear sheet of cellophane, like those used for overhead projectors, which I had left over from my years teaching high school, about 40 years ago, but they were still good. Then I carefully cut the red pieces along their edges. I lifted a corner of each red rectangle and carefully peeled off the rectangle. This left a clear window with white mullions. I then used the front and side walls to trim down the pieces to fit between the openings. This slide shows the process I used to build the doors for the service station. The top index cards show the first layer or the bottom layer of the doors. On the right are the front doors, on the left are the two bathroom doors, and the center contains the garage door. Notice that the first layer must have areas cut out where the window panes will show through. The bottom index cards contain the top layer, which will later be glued to the bottom layer. This will create the paneled doors that Paul has illustrated in his drawings. Don't cut the doors out yet. It will be easier to layer the two index cards if they are whole. After layering them, you can cut out the doors. I coated the back side of the second layer with liquid PSA, but if you have rubber cement or 3M Super 77 spray cement around, that will work also. I am trying to build this structure with what you might have around your house. The problem with PVA glue, such as Elmer's all-purpose glue, is that it is very watery, and paper loves to absorb water. If you use a tackier glue such as Aleene's, you may have better success. But a type of glue that is not made of water will reduce the problem of distorting the fragile pattern of the doors. If you use a PVA type of glue, be very careful. I suggest that you coat the back of the second layer rather than the front of the first layer. Take your time and let the glue dry before trying to layer the 2 index cards if you are using rubber cement or liquid PSA. After layering the 2 cards, I used an art gum eraser to remove most of the pencil markings. Be very careful as you erase around the mullions on the garage door. I will tell you that you probably will break 1 or 2. Don't panic. Keep the mullions if you break them off entirely. You can later attach them to the clear sheet, which will make the windows behind the door. This is the end of part 2. As you can see in this slide, I have colored the walls, but I have not yet weathered them. You can also see the windows behind the front door. You can see the front door in the dark brown. You can see the bathroom doors and the 2 side windows. You can also see the result of the garage door. Next time, we will put signs on the walls, mount the windows indoors, and construct the box of the building.
Well, Father Ron, thank you so much for the video this evening. I'm sorry you couldn't be with us, but if you have any questions, please send Father Ron an email, and he'll be glad to respond to you. And hopefully then he'll be able to join us in 2 weeks when he comes back for his part 3 of his build of this model.